Hello everyone, I'm Alex Auró. I'm a senior 3D artist at Brick Visual, and today I'll be walking through some of the sketches that I produced for one of our projects. I'll be giving you some tips and insights while I reconstruct them, and for that I'll be using 3ds Max, V-Ray, and Scene Manager. I don't want to start the main content of the video without mentioning Coldify, the architectural brand that allowed us to use one of their projects for this demonstration. And that being said, let's start with the video. Basically, the guys from Pulse challenged me to come up with at least 3 different setups in terms of cameras, mood, and etc., while keeping all of them in a single file. It's good to mention that the images you're looking at right now are simply raw renders with some tone mapping applied, but I did not use any post-processing software to get to this point. Let's jump into 3ds Max now and start walking through them. So this is the project I'll be working with today, and as I mentioned before, the project is provided by Coldify. This was originally placed at Les Ardennes, France, and yeah, excuse me if I mispronounce that. But basically what I started doing is exploring the model, just placing some cameras, and this is what I came up with. I like giving names to the cameras so I can easily relate to them a topic or a subject. And well, basically this first one is Olive. Here I have Razor, and the third one is Misty Hour. What we can see now is that all of them have the same aspect ratio, and this is not what I would like to have in a real life situation. So in a real life situation, maybe I would just start playing around in the render setup, adjusting the different aspect ratios and noting them down. That would be like the old way of doing it. With the Scene Manager, all this can be like simplified. Basically what I have here is the Scene Manager from Pulse. And now I just want to create a setup for each camera. And I can do that by clicking at this icon. And Pulse already created for me the 3 different setups with my cameras on them. So now if I switch from one another, my viewport is also switching from one camera to the other. Let me just give every single scene a name, and I will just be using the same names that I have on my cameras. That will be helpful later on if I want to adjust the render output and create some easy to use folder structure. So now that I have all my scenes renamed, I can start adjusting the aspect ratios. In this case, I know that for the Olive camera, I went for a 1.6 aspect ratio. For the Razor camera, I went for a 0.8 vertical aspect ratio. And for the Misty Hour, I also went portrait, and I used a 0.7 aspect ratio. Now you can see how when I flip from one another, the aspect ratios are easily updated, and I don't need to remember those numbers anymore. So let's start now with the first image. I had a clear idea for this camera what I wanted to go for, and it was basically a sunrise scene. I gathered some references to just make sure that what I wanted to do was looking like what a real photo would look like, and I started placing some V-Ray suns here and there. Well, let me turn on the V-Ray sun that I ended up using, and let me show you how the raw render looks like. Well, here we have it. Just before going forward, I want to mention a couple of things that came up directly to my mind when I saw this. First things first, I need some tone mapping. I want to have a photographic look on this image, so the first thing I will do is just to tone map the linear image that the render engine is giving to me. That's the first thing. Second thing is I need to create some depth. So I can see that I already have some aerial perspective. I'll go back to this later. But I need some shadow in the foreground that's bringing my eye into the building, that's leading my eye into the building. So let me just work first with the tone mapping, and then we can just move to the shadow thingy. What I like using here is the filmic tone mapper. This allows me to have a good control of how the highlights and the shadows in my image look like, And for that, I like using always an exposure first. I like to overexpose a little bit my image, so I have some highlights to damp down. And once I have that done, with the shoulder strength, I can adjust how much of these highlights I want to pull like down. I want to kill. On the other hand, on the other side, the toe strength allows me to add deeper contrasty shadows, and in this case, I will just leave them somewhere like that. So now the tone mapping is done. I need to move forward with the next element, and these are the shadows. I could do two things to create these shadows. Maybe I could just create a forest pack on the left that would cast some shadow in the foreground, but that maybe would be too much work, and I don't need to do that. So what I did was basically use some shadow planes. Let me turn them on and show you what I mean by that. So here are my shadow planes. Basically, these are just some regular photos that I was using to create the reflection on the windows that I just decided to use to create these same shadows. Just by aligning my camera or my viewport exactly with the sun direction that I have selected, I can see where these areas are casting shadow in my scene. So if I send a render now, you will see which effect is creating. Well, this is it. Now, having these foreground shadows allow me to highlight a little bit or emphasize the olive trees on the middle ground of my image. It also allows me to just focus a bit more in the distance and not get distracted by these foreground elements. Now my eye goes through the image and ends up right on the building. The last thing that I want to show you is how the aerial perspective is affecting my image. And I can just do that by turning it off and creating a region. Let me adjust that. So I just need to go to my environment and effects and disable my aerial perspective, number 1. Send a quick render. And I hope you can see the difference. I guess it's quite visible, but without this aerial perspective, these trees that I had in the background now come towards the foreground. They come up like contrasty, and this is not what I want to have. So yeah, just by using the V-Ray aerial perspective and some basic setup here, I can just pull these trees towards the background, and basically that's it for this scene. So let's translate this setup that I created on 3ds Max into a scene manager scene. For that, I just need to click on my olive scene and turn on the different elements that I've been using. First, I use the V-Ray Sun, so I can just enable the Sun tab and add the V-Ray Sun 001, that's the one I've been using. I can continue by enabling the environment tab, and I can just browse from my scene the V-Ray Sky that I've been using as well. I've been using an atmosphere effect, that's the V-Ray aerial perspective, and now it's activated. And last but not least, I've been using also some post-production adjustments. That's basically the tone mapping I've been using on the frame buffer, and I can also fetch that down on this scene. That's it. Basically, if I switch now to a different light setup and I come back to this one, I will still have all this information, and I will be able to come back to the same image I produced now. Let's move on to the next one. For the second scene, what I had in mind was to create some sort of an overcast, moody day. I still wanted some light to kick through, and I still wanted to have this foreground shadow and mid-ground like sunshine. So let me show you how this camera looks like right now. Let me disable all this tone mapping that I created. I don't need it anymore. And maybe I just can send it with that 25% of render settings. Now, what I will see is basically the new camera with the same lighting setup that I had on the previous image. So this is it. it's not looking bad, but this is not exactly what I was looking for. I like how the shadows look, so I won't touch that. And actually, I like how the light direction from the sun is also looking. So maybe I will need to adjust the intensity of the sun, but that's it. So let's start turning on and off stuff that I need to do. Basically, we said that the sun is correct, but I need an HDRI. And what I used for that is just an HDRI from 3D Collective. It's basically an overcast one, and I can just turn it on here. Now it's turned off by default, but switch it on. And probably I just simply don't want the aerial perspective anymore. We can check that later. But let's send the render again. So here I have the same problem that I had before. I need some tone mapping, and that's what I will continue with now. So again, I can add a filmic tone map. And now, since everything is already overexposed, maybe I even want to expose it down to underexpose it by a little. Let me just play around with this. Yes, I can just simply underexpose it. Change this to the power curve. Temp down a little bit the highlights and add some deeper shadows. What I simply think is that the sunlight intensity is a bit low, so I would like to increase it a little bit and maybe something like that. And now I can see that the image is definitely working. So I could simply save this light mix here and remember where I located this, but I can also do that on the scene manager. So since I think that the image is ready to go, I will set up again the scene manager for this specific view. Let me show you. So now we are at Razor, and again, we are using a V-Ray Sun. It's the same V-Ray Sun 001, but in this case, I want an intensity of 4. I can just leave it there, and now if I switch from one another, it will have on the Olive one an intensity of 1, and on the Razor one it will have an intensity of 4. Let's keep working on this scene for now. So I don't have any environment. Well, I do have an HDRI, but in this case I don't need to turn on the environment tab here. I just need to turn on the dome one. And I set it up as an HDRI with a V-Ray bitmap and all that stuff. After that, I just need to turn off the aerial perspective since I'm not using that. And I can fetch the post-production effects that I'm using on the frame buffer just by hitting here. Now you can see that if I go from one to the other, I have two different setups. But whenever I'm on the Razor one and I just send the render, I will just get the same results that I do have here. Let me just check that everything is correct. Now I should have an intensity of the sun that's stronger than before, the same HDRI, same shadows, and no aerial perspective. Exactly. So now I just realized that I forgot something about this. And it's basically that I have a character in my scene. Let me introduce you to the character. Yeah, so that's the guy that I'm talking about. This character is going to be present on both my first and second setups, but I don't want him to be on the same exact size, on the same exact place. Basically, if I go back to my Olive camera and I show you where he's located, he's nicely located in between two olive trees. This allows me to show him to show a bigger portion of him, and it's easy to read when I render out this first camera. But when I render the second one, he ends up covered by some bigger olive trees. So I would like to still keep him on the frame, but relocate it to somewhere around here. Again, I could just simply duplicate him and remember that I have to turn on and turn off one or the other object, but I can do that with the scene manager, and let me show you what I mean by that. So basically what I need to do is come to the scene manager, select both scenes that will contain this character, and turn on the objects tab. Now with the character selected, I can click on this icon and the character will appear on the rollout below. Since I want the character to be moved on the second scene, on my razor scene, I can just come to the razor scene, click on the transformation icon, and move it towards the right and place it where I want it to be located. Now it's on the correct spot. To fetch these adjustments into the specific scene, I just need to update this transform, and that's it. Now, if I switch back to the olive, it will go back to its original position, but whenever I go back to the razor camera, it's setting the character where it needs to be placed. Let's now just move on to the third camera, and let me just show you how I ended up creating that one. So for this last shot, I just wanted to create a completely different mood, and I had these thoughts in mind. I either wanted to go for a pitch black dark night or for a blue hour, like late blue hour, and this is what I ended up going for after some experimentation. So let me just turn on the HDRI that I was using for that, and actually I can just set this up directly on the scene manager. Let me just show you what I mean by that. So if I go back to the scene manager, now I'm on the MISTY hour scene, and there's a couple of things that I want to adjust. First, I will turn off, for example, the atmosphere effects that I'm not using on this scene. I can also tell the scene manager that I'm not using any lights, so I can disable sunlights. I can also adjust the dome light that I'm using, and in this case I'm using the HDRI 002 that contains a bitmap with an HDRI of a blue hour shot. And with all this information I can just send the render and show you how it's looking like so far. So yeah, it's pretty dark right now. What I would need probably is some interior lights, and after that I will probably need some tone mapping. I also considered adding some fog, and yeah, I will show you later on how that looks like. So let me turn on the interior lights that I created for this file. I basically used some basic plain lights from V-Ray, and I also added this huge plain light that was casting some nice edge light on the olive trees. Let me show you how this looks like now. And I'll proceed with adjusting the tone mapping and yeah, basically doing the adjustments for the base lighting of the image. Here we have it. Now it's starting to look better. And as I always do, I'll just add this filmic tone mapping and exposure. Probably I need to overexpose a little bit this image. Well, basically, maybe that's good. And I want just to kill a bit highlights, add some contrast, but not too much. And this would be basically it. There's something that I'm missing, that's the fog. And basically, there's also something that I have to consider. And here I had a ray clone that was affecting just this roof. But there's two things that I didn't like about this exact one. First is that I don't have it for the whole scene, so I needed to create the ray clone for the entire scene, but it was too reflective and there was no definition. There was like no big contrast between the roof and the sky that I had here. I wanted to have a result that was looking more like what I see on these other roofs that has no ray clone. So what I ended up doing is just creating a new ray clone with a new material, and basically instead of just again trying to write down somewhere or a reminder that hey, whenever I switch back to this specific scene I need to exchange the ray clones, I just created a layer that contains these two different ray clones. On one side the glossy ray clone and on the other side the rough ray clone, and I just adjusted my scene manager so I can easily flip from one another just by clicking on a scene. What I need to do for that is just enable the layer tab and find the layer that I want to be using. So basically these are the two layers, the Rayclone Metal Roof Glossy and the Rayclone Metal Roof Rough. So I just can turn them on here. So now I know that for this specific scene, I can just disable this first Rayclone and enable the second one. Now what I see here is just a basic representation of the Rayclone in a boxy way. So yeah, from now on this Misty Hour shot, I will be showing just the rough metal Rayclone. Let me finalize by fetching the post-production adjustments that I created for this file and show you that if I move back to this other scene, for example, now the Rayclone that I'm just showing, it's the glossy one. So that's correct. Just to finalize, I added some environmental fog on this specific view. Let me show you how that looks like. Well, I guess you can see how this atmospheric effect, this fog effect, adds a lot to the image. It creates this kind of misty mood that I was just looking for. And if there's something that I would like to adjust now, just to finalize, is just the light mix to create a bit more balanced tonality throughout the image. So I will just go to the interior lights here, just turn them towards the blue, cyanish color, maybe some thing like that. And I'll do the same thing for the big plane that's casting the light on top of these olive trees, just to be consistent throughout the image. I think that something like that can work. So basically, these are the settings for the last scene that I produced. So now that we have the three scenes prepared, the last thing I can do is just set up the render output. So I can just simply render out these three setups. I could do that by the good old method, just coming here render production, but Pulse also allows me to batch render all these things, and so I don't need to come back when one render is finished or whatever. So before batch rendering, let me just show you how I can set up the folder structure or where I could save all the channel information for these three different setups. Let me just select all the cameras and enable the render output channels rollout. Here what I see is that first I need to select a path. In this case, I do have my path selected here with the output. And now I can start creating a folder structure for this output. Let's say that I want to have maybe date, and I also want to have the camera name or whatever. Let's see, what else do I want to add? Maybe the scene name, and I just don't need the camera name. It's already set up there. So the camera name can be the folder that I'm using. So I can have a folder that's called, like I can show you, Misty Hour, and then I have the date plus the scene name here adjusted. And I can select also the type of file that I want to have. Here in this case, I want a PNG file. Now I see this icon appearing here. It's basically telling me that this Misty Hour folder that I created is not existing. But if I would render out with the batch processing from the scene manager, this folder would be automatically generated. So just let me finish by adding some text here in between, maybe an underscore, if I can find the underscore. Yes, and this is probably how I would just create this. Now I have the date, the Misty Hour, and maybe I can also add one last thing, version type. And maybe I can add an underscore also in between. So I have different versions. Now it's Misty Hour 001. And all these changes are applied for the different scenes. So if I would go for the olive one, it would create the olive folder and, well, basically the same whole setup and same whole layer structure for this. So this is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration. And I don't want to leave before saying again, big thanks to Coldify for providing this model. Also big thanks for the guys from Pulse for this opportunity. I hope to see you on the next one. And that's it. Bye.